years, I was Blackboard's Global Vice President for Education Strategy. And I went all over the world. I went to 19 countries. And I couldn't find any place that was studying changing education systems. I could only find organizations that were adding to the existing system. And since we were passing the barrier from the industrial era into the information era, the question was, where does that change come from? And this was kind of a gutsy thing. First of all, to call the National Laboratory, I started with Los Alamos. I thought, well, we need the Manhattan Project for education and learning. And Joanne, who works at Lanel, has a fantastic person there, Kurt Steinhaus, who's been involved with Paul in all the early efforts around education and technology. So I went to Los Alamos and I said to them, we need a lab to do this. And they said, what are you talking about? Better teachers? I said, no. We look at energy, we look at the environment, we look at the economy in great focus, but we don't do it the same way in education. So we created an organization that's a cross-sector nonprofit that says the only way to get fundamental change, and what we're going to do is we're going to have to bring stakeholders together that don't live together. So to Kathleen's point about vendors and academia, research institutes and government agencies, we have to get on the same page. So this has been a difficult and daunting task, but we've gotten some traction. A lot of it's come from help here at UT Austin with Paul and Darv and Ken and some others. So we launched our organization and basically said, we want the mission of parity. So in other words, if you've got a world that has got consumer products and has commercial products and corporate enterprise where, why would we be educating people with systems that are now getting 2 or 3 generations behind? And I can tell you from leaving the vendor community is horribly behind the rest of this world. Now maybe, Kathleen, from a data point of view, that's okay, but from servicing our students and their learning in a fast-paced world, it's awful. So every couple months that goes by, that we're not using systems like Amazon and Google and others, and I don't mean in an improper way, but I mean in processing that comes back down to a person, it's really important. So we are very focused on what can happen for individual learners and their families, which also, because at every level, we've just heard, we got the federal government involved, we have the state government involved, we have school districts that somehow think they're in their own universe, and then we have kids, and we have every piece of proof that school districts potentially could produce an enormous amount of failure along with success. And those numbers haven't changed much. So we're based in Silicon Valley. We're partnered fundamentally with 3 institutions, the University of California, Santa Cruz, UT Austin through Paul, and the Los Alamos Lab. We want to be in the Valley because we want to put pressure on the Valley to say, look, these problems have to be solved. If you want an economy where people are going to buy your stock and your products or go through your advertising, you better lend a hand. Don't get on an airplane and fly to DC and look for a visa. There's no pipeline in Silicon Valley to create tech workers out of the school systems. There's no money flowing into the impoverished parts in Silicon Valley, which is probably the height in this country of income disparity. And our focus is really on personalization. It's about not just personalizing from the district or a vendor point of view to a student, but having ownership on the part of learners and their families and access that needs to be found. So personalized learning, infrastructure redesign, it's in nobody's, in no corporation's sort of ability at this point to get a better infrastructure put up generally for education. It's too expensive, it's too hard to sell to education. Public has to be involved, but we're looking at how that infrastructure will happen. Interagency activity, I'm going to talk about in depth, has to be dealt with. And now we're moving into rapidly a skills-based economy. There are hundreds of thousands of open jobs now. For skills-based, you don't even have to have a college degree. And the fact that we're telling people they have to complete college to be successful, that's statistically correct in some ways, but all of a sudden, if somebody goes to a community college and gets the right skills package right now and there's a job match, they're going to be moving from community college or even high school into a $60,000, $70,000 job where there's an immediate need. So there's overall change, and what we see is no capacity to deal with that in some sort of organized way. Now, I'm talking at a visualization conference. I'm not going to really address it, but it's a central concern of ours that we think that everything we're working on has to end up where we take this visualization conference, the other things that are going on, and we make visualizing data not a secondary but a primary thing of understanding what's going on in a complex world. So what we have going on, if we're developed into these 4 areas, individuals, we think eventually the transformation that will be required in the information age is for students and families to have individual learning accounts. Everybody knows in this room that nobody goes through anymore and just does 4 years at a college, gets a degree, and goes out. So I might get a skill from a community college while I'm in a 4-year institution. I might go to a training seminar that summer. I might do 10 other things. I have an internship. I have nowhere to record that where it can be recorded and verified. If I'm a high school student and I took college courses, I have no way other than hopefully filling out the application process. So we believe that individual accounts will help schools, will help school districts. It's a difficult problem. And the agent-based modeling project that Joanne talked about yesterday, that UT Austin's involved in Santa Cruz, we wanted to go in and see how people flow through a school district to understand how we would actually give them agency. So we can look at them as agents, but can they actually have agency? So we're dedicated to deep research in that area, and we've received NSF money to do that. On the infrastructure side and the privacy side, there are the beginnings of trusted identity, which is not moving data, but moving information about you to give you access to data. So we have a project that's funded by the National Institute for Standards and Technology, came out of a concern on the White House for trusted identity. We're doing, in 2 school districts in California, we're doing this process to authenticate parents with various different roles into various different technologies and the school controls. And it's been a really, really interesting process to look at this. So some of the privacy concerns that Kathleen addressed, looking for those solutions where you can secure who you are, what information you're touching, who has access to your information, that world's evolving. So we're saying if we believe in you have to take care of this student, they have to have access, we're going to have to secure that process. And then regions, the economy is based on regional activity. There's no such thing as a real state economy or a real national economy. It's based on regions. Well, we have every problem you can imagine in a region. So you've got the federal government and its set of regulations, you have state regulations, and you have multiple agencies that are doing things. Well, if you're receiving services from multiple agencies that are producing multiple data, and you're trying to secure your kid's future or yourself trying to navigate it as a student, pretty difficult. And the 4th area that we're working in is this skills-based, looking at how competencies can be managed. Instead of having a learning management system, can we move to a competency and assessment management system where I as a learner, you as an employer, you as an institution will actually know the particular thing that I've learned, as opposed to these vaguer signals that we have. So we're looking at what economy, economics, labor data signals are. Our theory of action is this. On one side, I have my famous interview process is when you get in the van to go from the airport to the hotel, generally there's a 20-year-old driving you unless there's a retired person. And I always say, I actually say to both of them, what are you doing about education? And invariably, the 20-year-old will say this: I've had a year or 2 at community college. I'm not sure what I want to do. I'm out driving. The last time I did it was down in Lone Star in Houston. And the guy who drove me, family had immigrated from Mexico 5 years ago. I said, what are you doing? He said, I had a year of Lone Star, and it was great. But unfortunately, I got my girlfriend pregnant, and I've got to work. And I said, so what do you really want to study? Okay, so here's a guy, broken accent, pregnant girlfriend, says, I'm really interested in astronomy. Okay? So I said, great. I said, but he says, I know there are no jobs. I said, what? So I said, do you know what goes into astronomy, what you have to study? He said, yeah, physics and mathematics. He said, and I'm comfortable with those. I said, well, why don't you call up Lone Star? They've got a great online set of programs, and start taking some course in math and physics, because that'll lead you to all kinds of careers. He said, you can do that? All right, so he had no knowledge, but that's the kind of world that we live in. So he's in a post-institutional society. Most young people, most people 30 and other, put up with institutions, whether they're education or they're the government, because they have to. So you've got this post-institutional society moving on one side, and then you have the stubbornly institutional systems on the other that there's no real method to bring these two together. That's what we're really concerned about, is how you bring these two worlds together and then do it in a way that's compliant. So on the data side, I'm going to take you through, we're interested in research, obviously, and it's got to be deep research and meaningful. We're interested in standards. We have some pretty weak technology standards in the K-12 world. They're better in higher ed. Governance, to Kathleen's point, boy, do we need it. It's very hard to understand. And then business models, because this stuff can't be funded by the government forever. And unfortunately, having been a vendor, I know how tightly we draw our business models, because we want to report out our quarterly earnings, and a lot of things go by the wayside when that happens. And then we need service and privacy. How do you balance service and privacy? So that's our organization. I'll take questions on it later, but we're really trying to get in the middle of the industrial to information change, looking broadly. We also think that you've got to partner with expertise. So one of our big organizational principles is to go find organizations that may not be concentrating on the education issue, or they've found us, which is quite interesting, and say to them, let's work on something together. So the pregnancy piece that about Target, that came from APT. This company is Applied Predictive Technologies. 20% of American retail flows through their big data operation, and they conduct millions of scientific investigations every day on those organizations. So they came to us after having done some work in Denver and said, we're really interested in schools and states and helping them organize and look at the patterns in their data. Well, that would be fantastic. If we have people that can help balance that, great. And then the Trust Network by Resilient is another one. And then anybody who doesn't, how many people here know Guru Learning? Anybody? Okay, so write this down and go look at it. GOORU learning.org. Very, very senior research scientist from Google. Kind of got ticked off at being at Google, wanted to do stuff in education. They won't really do it unless they can mine data, so they don't really do it. He set up, it's really the alternate internet for education where anything that's on the web, they've got it, and it's quite interesting. All right, so I'm going to go into this problem that we're focusing on right now. And that is, if you're receiving multiple services in a region, you're receiving services obviously from your school. It's under both federal and state guidelines, but you're also receiving services from multiple agencies. What do you do? So we are taking our grants. This is the way we work. So the grant that allowed us to look at the individual students comes from the San Jose database that has a tremendous amount, because of a court order, of data from all sorts of social services. And so you can begin to see patterns on how those agencies work together. It's one of the only databases like it in the country. So we're taking that research and that knowledge base. We're taking our research that we're doing on trusted identity and so forth. And then we have a grant from the NSF on building community capacity for data-intensive research. The NSF wants to see better social science research coming out of social agencies and so forth, but there's no way to access that. We looked at that and said, well, that's pretty interesting. We want to actually help the regions do things, and if that helps universities and others do better research, great. So that's a 3-county area in Silicon Valley. We concentrate on the valley in particular. And UC Santa Cruz, in most of these cases, NLET organizes the participants who will actually write and receive the grants. We then usually assist in that process. So we conceived of this, and we went out, and we're now going through all the agencies, all the county offices of education, and looking at that whole arena and seeing what could happen in a data sense in the future. UC Santa Cruz has their engineering, economics, social science, and others as co-PI. So it's a fascinating piece of work. And really what we've boiled this down to is this is the digital divide in our mind. So on one side you have the computer and enterprise sector, which is running on steroids and not listening to anybody, and it operates on 2 principles, n equals 1 and n equals all. So Kathleen went through this. I'm a person, they know everything about me, they're sharing my information. I wrote an article that I think is actually going to be published called Google Trademark versus Me Trademark. Google, I'd like my algorithms, please. Okay? And in fact, Google, if you came to me and said, what are you going to buy in the next 6 months? I might tell them, and I might actually be able to have better predictive analytics than looking at all the ads. I never open up the ads. I've opened up 2 in my lifetime. So N equals 1, N equals all. That's the world we live in the corporate world, and the world we live in the consumer world. In the social and education sector, we live in the world where N equals sum. Okay? Now, we know the sum. We know the rate of income disparity, the poverty production in this country. So we don't have a way to deal with the N equals sum. And right now, you've got multiple agencies with many accounts and many different pieces of data, and it comes down to a family. So what happens when you have a really impacted family, single parent, trying to deal with a kid who's in juvenile justice, who might have mental health issues, who's got school tardy issues and so forth? This is a reality, and it's not a reality for a few people. It's a reality for millions of people. And it's mediated by local, regional, state, and federal agencies. So it's very difficult. So one of our questions is, can we take these pieces and these arenas that we're working in, and can we go from a research paradigm, where we're looking at what kind of research can be brought together, can we move to some sort of standards? Can we have some kind of discussion? So the way this grant is proceeding is really quite interesting. We're looking at, obviously, you have privacy and protection on one hand, service and learning on the other. And what we're getting to is a sense of, could there be something that would be called a regional data trust? In other words, could we move from a one account, so I as a person, so we invert this to the N equals 1 model. Now, can that run through something that deals with governance, deals with standards, and deals with all these different pieces? Can I use that underused my data button as part of this? So we're exploring now, as part of that Silicon Valley project, of whether we can look at this data trust model and what would go into a regional trust. It wouldn't necessarily be a giant database. That would be the last thing you'd want, because you don't want to move the actual ownership of the data out. But you want to be able to use that data so that it helps people and that people have access to it. So we're in a sense saying, can we invert this model? Can the N equals 1 that I do when I don't go on Facebook, but let's say I go on something else, or I'm on LinkedIn, or I'm buying a book from Amazon, can I get the N equals 1 value somehow? Can we invest and try to do this in some counties? So there's some interesting people working on aspects of this. There's a great organization called Stewards of Change, which looks at the interagency agreements. And I'm not sure how much they tend to do it regionally and not so much federally, but they get agreements signed, and then they work on particular kinds of releases so that the families can say, yes, I will release that information, again, if I'm informed on where it's going and how it's going to be used. So again, in the inversion, there's some consent pieces that can come along. Then there are all the technical issues. But certainly there are people that have dealt with these technical issues at a lot of levels. So there are data architectures and standards, there's access and registries and so forth. But this is a complex problem, and in talking to a university audience, these are the kind of things we have to look at. We do not have the replacements for institutions. And I was walking around last night, and I'd say the value of the university, especially the R1s that are big, full of buildings and so forth, they're not anachronisms. It's great to have a place that won't go away in the next couple of years. It's great to have a center that'll sit here and won't be torn down and a mall will go up. So there's a real reason, but we're not putting the right energy into solving these problems. We're looking for point solutions, and what comes out of the commercial world is that the large publishers and the large learning platforms, Blackboard and others, are now owned by private equity. Private equity's job, in a lot of ways, is to keep the world right the where it is. So when a vendor looks at you who's funded by private equity, the University of Texas, they're looking at how much can I get for how long, how can I secure it and get my bonus trip. So East Coast private equity is very concerned in keeping the world the way it is because they know how to sell to it. Silicon Valley is running, popcorn makers. So here's $1 million. I've got an app I'm going to go do. And by the way, it's going to change how we do math in our lifetime. Well, good luck. they ever sold to a school before? Did they ever realize that popular movements don't change things in schools? So you have Silicon Valley that's investing in point solutions that are popping up all over the place and making a lot of noise, but they're not going to tip over the system. We do not have an intelligent middle, and it has to be, again, operated by some kind of combination with universities, with research institutes, which is the reason we went to Los Alamos, and look at these things in a much more constructive way. So when we get down, again, to this model, we think the regional trust will make a lot of sense. And we're working on that. We're going to go to further scale-up grants. We're going to move from Silicon Valley to some other regions. There's also, you might know, Knowledge Works in Cincinnati does a lot of work in communities, again, getting regional dialogues to happen, but they're not taking it between agencies, but they're not taking it to the technology. The stewards of change who are working on the legal agreements are doing a great job, but they're not taking it to the technology, and somehow we're working in the middle to look at how some of that will occur. And this work that we're doing on this project comes out of the partnership between our nonprofit, which is new and none of you have heard of before, and our partnership with UC Santa Cruz, which is for a Center for Learning Architecture, and I'll talk about that. Next is we've been talking among some of the people here about, I'm just going to deviate from the regional piece, to talk about getting visualization to be a central aspect of education and learning data, and to begin to build a next center at some point where we'll be doing that, and we'll take things that are starting at this conference and other places and have that data more visual and more available. So if I'm an individual consumer and I'm on the N=1, I'd love to be able to go see what's happening. We tried, UT and NLET, to do a grant where we would look at the provisioning for math tools and math teacher professional development across Texas school districts, and then look at the data for performance of those students. And if you go to a visualization model that's a topographic map, if you will, and you say maybe kids who perform at the level of a B, the grade of a B across their time, is the flat terrain. Anything below is a valley. Anything above is a mountaintop. I'd love to be able to look across the state of Texas or across my county or across the country. I'd like to be able to see that over time. So I didn't speak on visualization today, but I'm really open to any side conversations on it. We would like to see, maybe in Santa Fe, maybe in Austin, a giant set of screens where you could look at the education, learning, and skills weather maps, if you will. And again, and Kathleen, I think this would be generally anonymized data so you could look at patterns, because if people can't ingest the disparities, we can't really understand what's going to happen. I think all of us know, and one of the things I say to teachers all the time, if you don't think that kid in front of you is holding your retirement check in their hands, you're out of your mind. I mean, the grades those kids receive is going to have a direct benefit on whether your pension is going to be funded 20 years from now. So that's really what I have to say. We're taking a next step out there in trying to do a new kind of organization. It's scary and exciting, but we just feel it's necessary to work on the next level of things. Thanks.